Okay. In this way, we're going to maintain client records. Remember, all client records are confidential. These cannot be shared without consent. We're not going to allow unauthorized people to see the binder. Remember, even the fact that the patient is receiving services is confidential. We must abide by the law. Okay? Here at Learning Arts, we abide by the HIPAA compliance laws. And remember from earlier in this presentation, not the ethical presentation, but this whole RBT training, the HIPAA is the portability thing, right? How we store records and how they're portable. Okay. But the fact is that when we're talking about patients, I basically make everything top secret. Okay. I live in a small town, so it can be sometimes hard to talk to my wife about what's going on at work because she may be able to pick up on who I'm talking about. And but basically, I make all information top secret. That's basically what I say to anyone who's not on the team. So 2.02 in responsibility. The behavior analyst's responsibility is to all parties affected by those services. When multiple parties are involved and could be defined as a patient or client, a hierarchy should be written out. Okay, that basically means if we're going to work and the parent and the child, they could both kind of be considered a client, right? We need to say, we need to write that out. Okay, what are these? What are we doing here with you as a parent? What are we doing here with the child? Okay, the behavior analyst identify and communicate who the ultimate primary beneficiary of the services is in any given situation, and will advocate for that patient's best interest. Basically, we're identifying who the primary beneficiary is, and we're going to make sure the roles and responsibilities of the individuals in that person's life are outlined. The rights and prerogatives of clients, 2.05. Okay. The right of the client are paramount, and behavior analyst supports clients' legal rights and prerogatives. Basically, we're looking at the patient. The rights to that patient are the most important, okay? And the behavior analysts are going to support that person's legal rights. Clients and supervisees must be provided, on request, an accurate and current set of the behavior analyst credentials. Okay, so if you as an RBT feel like you need to see the credentials of the behavior analyst in your area, it's your right to ask for that. And anytime you're going to be electronically recording interviews or sessions, we have to secure that right from the clients and the staff. Okay. Consent for different uses must be obtained specifically and separately. Okay, so if I'm going to use this for a presentation, rather than say, data collection, I need to ask the person. But if you're going to be recorded as an RBT, you should never be recorded without your permission. I tell families that. I say, if you're going to record a session, make sure to let us know so we can let the staff know. Likewise, I'm not going to record a session without letting the parents know. Clients and supervisees must also be informed of their rights and about procedures to lodge complaints about professional practices. Okay, and the behavior analyst, we're going to comply with any requirement for criminal background checks. Okay, basically, you're going to be about forthcoming about our credentials, and we're going to comply with the criminal background check system, and we're going to try and we're going to strive to be, as upfront about anything, such as, video recording or audio recording. And we're going to want to make sure to let the patients know that they have a right at any time to complain about the professional practices of the behavior analyst with the employer, the appropriate authorities, and also the board. We want to be as forthcoming about our credentials and comply with criminal background checks. Clients should always know they have a right to lodge a complaint, whether with the company or with the BACB board. And client rights are highly important. .06 Maintaining confidentiality. Behavior analysts have a primary obligation and take responsible precautions to protect the confidentiality of those whom they work with, recognizing that confidentiality may be established by law, organizational rules, or professional or scientific relationships. Basically, we're going to treat all patient info as top secret to anyone but those on the team. So again, we're going to treat all the information as top secret to everyone but those that are on the actual team. This means that we're not going to discuss patient A at patient B's house. This means that we're not going to go home and discuss with our significant others or our friends what we did at work that day with a certain client using, anything that could be identifiable. If we have to, we're going to speak in general terms. Well, today at work I got hit, or I got pinched, or the person I was working with did really well. Okay, even saying something like that. The person I was working with today did really well on their, timekeeping or telling time. That could be too much information. For example, in my small town, if one of my friends knows that certain patient or a certain kid is working on, learning how to tell time or learning how to read the clock, that may be enough information to know who I'm talking about. So I'm going to talk very general terms when I'm talking to others. .06 Maintaining confidentiality. B. Behavior analysts discuss confidentiality at the outset of the relationship and thereafter as new circumstances may warrant. Basically, from the beginning of the service, I'm going to tell parents or guardians that everything is confidential. Also, RBTs, I'll tell them that. Okay, and whenever new circumstances, such as when we might get a new technician on the case, or if there's a new procedure we're using, whatever it's going to be. Okay, but basically I'm going to tell them right away, and I do this because I want them to understand that sometimes if they call me, I'm not going to be able to discuss openly if I'm in a public place. For example, there was one time I was sitting at a Target, the store, waiting for an assessment to start. Basically waiting around, killing time. And the patient's mom called me, and I picked up the phone and I told her right there that we cannot discuss anything about the case because I'm in a public place, because I didn't want any kind of identifying information to happen. So I'm going to, I'll do that whenever it comes up, whenever that situation comes up. And in order to minimize intrusions on privacy, behavioral analysts are include only information that's important to the purpose for which that communication is made. Basically, all this means is that we're going to use the minimum amount of information that gets across the point. Whenever we're discussing things, or whenever we're talking with, in a setting where, it could come up or whatever. Basically, here we're just talking about minimizing any type of breach of confidentiality. So we're just going to use information, the least identifying information possible. So for example, at Learning Arts, we use a lot of initials. So my name, Mike Stevens, would be MS or MIST, depending on how you want to do that. Confidentiality 2.06D. Behavior analysts discuss confidential information that we obtain, in clinical or consultative relationships or data, and we're going to use that only for appropriate purposes, only for the professional purposes by which that was obtained. And we're only going to discuss this with persons that are, concerned with that matter or concerned with that patient. We're not going to discuss it with others that have no, relationship with that patient. Basically, if we get information, whatever information we obtain, we're going to use that appropriately. And behavior analysts must not share or create situations that are likely to result in the sharing of identifying information, such as videos, written stuff, pictures, whatever, about current clients and supervisees within social media context. This is a general rule. I tell RBTs, I tell people I supervise not to mix anything with social media. Okay, don't ever post pictures of with your patient on social media. I tell parents that don't ever post pictures of the technician with the patient, on their social media, Facebook or whatever. We try not to allude to anyone or to make it obvious who we're talking about, right? The point being is that you want to be as confidential as possible. And it does go, it does swing both ways. I tell parents all the time. Like I had a parent once who posted pictures of their child, the person we're working with the technician. And I told them that's not appropriate because that's a breach of confidentiality. Again, we use very general terms. I might told the parent, you can say, hey, like my kid is working with their therapist, and leave it at that. But no pictures, no identifying information. .07 Maintaining records. Behavior analysts must maintain records, and when we're maintaining these records, we're going to maintain it with appropriate confidentiality in creating, storing, accessing, transferring, and disposing of these records, whether they are written, automated, electronic, or any other medium. And behavior analysts maintain and dispose of records in compliance with applicable laws, regulations, policies, such as in a manner that permits compliance with the requirements of this code. For example, one of the requirements of this code is that we maintain records for 7 years. Okay. Now, if the law of what state we're operating in says we must keep records for 10 years, we will keep records for 10 years because that we're complying with the law, and that also meets the requirement of the code. But say we're in a state that requires that documents or data be kept for 5 years, well, we're going to keep them for 7 because that's what the code says. That's what the ethical code says. It still meets the requirement of the law, right? We kept it for 5 years, but we're going to keep it for the additional 2 years to make it 7, because that's what this code says. That's what the ABA code says. Basically, when we're talking about keeping records, we want to meet the same standards of confidentiality. We want to use only initials, minimal amount of identifying information, so forth and so forth. And when we dispose of it when the 7 years is up, after we kept it in a secured location, we need to dispose of it in a way that's going to be lawful and to basically destroy it in a way that says, hey, look, we can't, there's no more identifying information. Okay. So we're always striving to maintain confidentiality. And remember, these are official records. They should be treated with care. They should be kept and stored in accordance with the policy of the state. So, for example, Learning Arts, we keep them in a secure location that's off the site of the clinic or the offices. We only have minimal identifying information on it so that we can, keep the data confidential. And again, that's going to be in accordance with the policy of the state. So the policy of the state is to keep something for 5 years. We will keep it for 5 years, of course, but we'll also keep it for that additional 2 years to make it 7, because that's the policy of the code. But if the state says 10 years, we'll keep it 10 years. So here's an example I have for this. If Edward completed his data for the program, and he accidentally put it in his pocket and took it home, something I've done before, and if you figure it wasn't worth holding on to, maybe it was just a little bit of data, so he threw it out. Okay, that is a clear violation of Ethics Code 2.07. Okay, that's an official record. Okay, had data on it. Okay, what he should have done is to secure it behind 2 locks. That's the HIPAA code, right? And taking it back to the code and taking it back to the patient's binder. So again, just to be clear, he should have put it behind 2 locks, which is a HIPAA thing, which is a HIPAA policy, and taken it back to the binder. By throwing it out, he violated Ethics Code 2.07 because that's not a, well, first of all, it's probably not in compliance with actually destroying official records, which is usually to shred it or something like that. But it also is not keeping it for 7 years either, right? Ethics Code 2.08 discusses disclosures. Okay? Behavior analysts, or RBTs, never disclose confidential information without the consent of the client, except as mandated by law or were permitted by law for a valid purpose. Okay? Such as to provide needed professional services to the client, to obtain appropriate professional consultations, to protect that client or others from harm, or to obtain payment for services. In which instance the disclosure will be, any kind of disclosure is going to be limited to the minimum that is necessary. Okay, we're going to use the minimum amount of information that's necessary to achieve the purpose. Okay, this could, if we're subpoenaed by court to discuss a case, to consent with that law, we're going to go there and we're going to use the minimum amount of information that allows us to talk about that patient. Okay, and of course, if we have to provide, like let's say a patient hurts themselves and we're out there and the parent can't call 911. We're going to call 911 and we're going to use the patient's name, right? Because we're protecting them. Or if the house is on fire and we're outside, we're waiting if we're waiting for, like, say, the services to start, we're outside in our car and we notice the house is on fire and the firefighter comes, we're going to tell the firefighter, hey, there's a kid in there, a 5-year-old kid, and this is their name. Okay, because we're protecting the client. We're protecting them. Or if we're discussing it with if we know a speech pathology, or the parent asks us to, seek out further services, like a speech pathology service, to contact them to see if they'd be eligible, we may use some identifying information, such as, what their, condition is, or what their medical, condition is, because we're trying to get them access to other consultations. For example, I was at a speech pathology office one time, and I told the speech pathologist I didn't use the patient's name because, remember, I used the minimum information, but I did tell them it was a 5-year-old girl who was having trouble basically with the syntax that she was using in her words, and I would basically ask them if they would be willing to take a patient like that and to have the parent call them. I used identifying information, such as what was going on with the patient, how old they were, because I was attempting to get them more services. .10, 2.10, documenting professional work and research. Behavior analysts, RBTs, this is why we have you guys take notes, are going to appropriately document their professional work. Okay, whatever we're doing. This assures accountability, and it meets the other requirements in organizations. Basically, it meets the requirement of having a record, right? We have a responsibility to create and maintain documentation that's going to be detailed enough and that's going to be high quality enough that would be consistent with best practices, within our field and the law. Okay, we need to basically prove, because remember, someone is paying for this service. Okay, even if the parents don't have to pay, even if the guardians, the client family doesn't have to pay, someone is providing funding for this. Okay, and they need records that show what kind of services were given. And so again, it's very important to have these records and to have this documentation that's going to show this. And we do have that ethical responsibility to create and maintain this documentation. Basically, we document, my general rule is document everything. It's one of the reasons I like to use email a lot, because it provides a documentation system that shows, hey, look, we did try to resolve this, or we did do this. It's one of the reasons why we keep all the data, right? Is to show, hey, look, we were here working. So records and data, 2.11. Behavior analysts create, maintain, disseminate, and store, basically, and dispose of records relating to the practice of working or with that patient, or if they're even doing research, in accordance with any laws, regulations, and policy. Okay, and it must, again, comply with this code, and in a manner that allows for appropriate transition of service oversight at any moment in time. Okay, basically, just saying that when we're keeping data, when we're maintaining it, we need to do it in a way that, hey, look, if this person moved like tomorrow, we'd be able to transfer that. And behavior analysts must maintain records and data for at least 7 years, and as otherwise required by law. So like I said earlier, if the law says 10 years, we're going to keep it for 10 years. Okay, and any kind of record keeping should be complied, in compliance with this ethics code, such as maintaining confidentiality. So again, you must, as a behavior analyst, we must maintain any data that we take, any of the records for that program, for at least 7 years. And that keeping those records need to be still, has to be compliant with this code, which is maintaining confidentiality and stuff like that. So I'm not going to store the records in a big, binder that says this is, Mike Stevens' record. Okay, if I was the patient, because that's too much identifying information. I might say something like MS, my initials, 2014 to 2015. Those are records for those years.